here is focused on the commercial PACE industry, specifically the role PACE can have helping businesses and communities come out of the pandemic, which we hope we're all working on. We have three fantastic speakers with us today. Full disclosure, all three are capital providers within the Show Me PACE Clean Energy District. But first we have Ethan Elser, Executive Vice President of PACE Equity, the leading funder of PACE for commercial real estate development projects in the country. Ethan oversees the company's 20+ state or origination platform and credit approval, as well as being responsible for underwriting and structuring all of PACE Equity's projects. Additionally, we have Eric Lidvet, Business Development Office at Twain Financial. Eric sources real estate, sorry, you all saw my tongue's not working for me today. Eric sources real estate transactions involving Twain's various financial products with specialty areas in CPACE, LIHTC, HTAC, and ground lease capital. And then finally, we have Ian McCauley. He's the director of Enhanced Capital, is responsible for Enhanced Capital's PACE business. Enhanced Capital has a 20-year track record of public policy-oriented financing and has been active for over 20 years in the public finance space. Enhanced launched their CPACE program last year and is active nationwide. So each speaker is going to give a little introduction, and then we're going to be doing more of a panel presentation. But first up, Ethan, take it away.
Great. Well, thanks, Josh. Appreciate you having us and putting this panel together. And good afternoon, good morning to everyone, and thanks for taking some time. I just thought I'd, introduce myself and PACE Equity briefly, and we're going to talk more about, all sorts of different projects where PACE financing has been leveraged, let's just say kind of during and, as we're hopefully, as Josh said, starting to come through COVID. But next slide, please, Travis. Just a little bit about us. As Josh mentioned, a lot of what we're focused on is using PACE as a capital stack tool for real estate development. And that's really our forte. We pioneered using PACE for ground up new construction, for redevelopment projects with all sorts of different tax credits. And one of the nice things that we bring in addition to that experience is really the full spectrum of using the commercial PACE tool. Some of you, may or may not know that there's a lot of work that goes in addition to the funding. So we have an on-staff energy and transaction team who can really work with you, throughout the whole life cycle of the project, from design, the energy engineering, working with, Josh and Travis, and they do a great job. So that's just a little bit about us. We're headquartered in Milwaukee, and we've done over 200 projects all around the country. Next slide, please. So again, I thought I'd focus on, one area of commercial PACE financing that's really gotten a lot of use, during COVID, and that's what we call retroactive refinancing, whereby you can use the PACE mechanism for projects that are, let's just say, mid-construction, let's just say kind of getting a certificate of occupancy, completing, or even have installed improvements, or been constructed within the last, it varies a little bit, but let's just say within the last, 2 to 3 years. So I thought I'd just talk about two different projects that, were really significantly hit by the pandemic for different reasons, and talk through those. So this was a new construction Cambria Hotel located just outside of Detroit. In fact, both projects are in Michigan. And PACE financing, PACE Equity were not a part of this project originally. They had gotten a construction loan. It had started, say sometime in 2019, but due to, let's just say the shutdown in construction, during COVID, and then the rise in the cost of materials, they had a fairly significant cost overrun. And they had used different kind of mechanisms during construction just to see it come through. But ultimately, either the owners were going to have a not completely finished project, or really wouldn't have been able to actually open the hotel. So this was a case where we had an existing relationship with the client. They're a multi-project hotel developer. And we were able to come in and fund just about $3.6 million right at completion. And again, that allowed the hotel to open. It's actually been very successful. It's been, kind of a sellout, both the restaurant and the hotel, but it was really needed capital, again, completely due to, the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. And in a sense, a little bit of a similar story. This was a redevelopment project converting actually from a hotel to senior housing, just also outside of Detroit. This was a little bit more unique. This was a senior housing project. And in this case, same thing. There was, due to the work stoppage, but really more the cost of materials dramatically rose due to the supply chain issues during COVID. So these developers actually used their operating reserves in order, again, same thing, to get construction completed. So we were able to come in retroactively, the project had been finished, and provide financing that allowed them to open their doors, keep the doors open, and really replenish those needed reserves. So we'll talk more about, we call it liquidity financing and kind of rescue capital that we've seen during COVID. But just thought I'd talk, specifically about how you can actually go backwards, again, whether it's mid-construction, at completion, or even, multiple years after you've installed improvements or built or renovated property and obtained PACE financing. Thanks, everyone. Look forward to talking more.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ethan. Next up, Eric.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Good morning, everybody. I'm Eric Lindvet from Twain Financial. Thanks to MEI and sponsors for setting up this opportunity for us to talk energy policy and PACE today. Just a quick intro to Twain. Twain's a private finance company headquartered in St. Louis, just west of downtown. We've got about 75 employees. Twain was created in 2013 to manage new market tax credit funds and started with a pretty sizable portfolio. So quickly spun off several other business lines. 8 years later, we've originated well over $1 billion in various financings across our offerings. I've listed a few of those current offerings that we're advertising in the slide here. Our most prolific offerings are HTC Equity, our ground lease capital, and PACE. The company has grown rapidly over the last 4 to 5 years, and we started as a small deal investor, but our current minimum PACE transaction size has grown with our number of employees and overhead. Now is somewhere in the $2 to $3 million range. But as a newer organization, Twain has kind of a startup culture, gives us quite a bit of flexibility to be creative, offer outside the box solutions, and try out new product lines. We've invested in SBIC, small business lending, venture capital funds, straight real estate investment in local St. Louis civic projects, and new market tax credit business loan funds. But PACE has been one of our more successful offerings. So we're interested and want to participate in the direction PACE programs take broadly and here in Missouri. I'm going to talk about one project in particular later on in the discussion, but just as a preview, it's the Armory building in Midtown St. Louis. It's a large renovation project of an old military building, and it'll probably make sense later on when we're talking specifically about the timing of COVID, but just generally, it'll be a case study in the flexibility of the PACE program, and the need to be creative about rethinking the way we use old large buildings. So that's it for now.
Thank you, Eric. Ian.
Thanks. My name's Ian McCulley, and I run the CPACE business at Enhanced Capital. If you want to go to the next slide, Josh, and the next one. So Enhanced Capital is a national public policy investment firm. So we offer the full suite of federal and state tax credits. So historic tax credits, we're a new market CDE, both federal and state, solar ITC, and then also LIHTC. And then we have a couple of lending businesses around those tax credits. So we have a small business lending business, we have a CPACE lending business, which I run, and then we have a tax credit bridge lending business. So we operate nationally and we are based in New Orleans. Next slide. So the case study I wanted to talk about, and we can kind of dive into this later, but we did a PACE retroactive deal last year for the Philadelphia Met Opera House, which was a 100-year-old opera house, completely dilapidated. And they came in 2017 and 2018 using historic tax credits and new markets tax credits and did a beautiful renovation. The building opened and then COVID hit, right? So then the building shut. So COVID obviously not great for a concert business. So we were able to provide retroactive PACE financing to help them stabilize their capital structure, pay off some extremely expensive mezz debt, and give them a little bit of operating runway. And so fortunately it's back open now, and fingers crossed they can continue to operate. But that shows the power of PACE, right? That you can use it to sort of refinance more expensive capital with cheaper PACE capital that's long term. Thanks, Josh.
All right, thank you very much. And you kind of all mentioned it, but so for the audience, we're just going to do a traditional moderated discussion here. Definitely encourage you to use the chat or the Q&A to be able to engage these folks. They have a significant amount of experience, as you said, as you've seen here. They're all closing in over $1 billion worth of PACE financing between the three of them. So I guess the first thing is, can you, and Ethan, you said that a little bit more, but or you provided a little bit, but Ian or Eric, is there anything else you'd like to talk to us about, a project that was impacted by COVID that used PACE?
Yeah, Josh, I can talk a little bit about that Armory building. And if you'll allow me to tell a little story here, it's kind of important to understand how COVID impacted the building. That Armory building was initially proposed to be a development for WeWork. It was going to be that creative kind of flex office space. And the developer went ahead and took down the building, and it had been left vacant for decades. So he had to do a ton of initial stabilization, and for whatever reason he chose to do that with his own capital and with a little bit of bank debt, and figured the tenant issue would sort of solve itself. And so he buys this historic building, then starts sinking money into it. Of course, WeWork doesn't work out, and so he pivots. And he had spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $18 million on the building in March of 2020 when COVID hits. At that time, he had been talking to some concert booking companies, some of those big national groups, and the plan was to convert it into a large concert venue, because the middle of the building is this giant open field house. It's a really neat space and would set up perfectly for concerts. When COVID hits, those potential concert tenants pull out, and these developers left kind of holding the bag. He pivots again to a use that is kind of unique. It's a rec hall concept that's worked in a few other places, where it's kind of like a new boutique Dave & Buster's, where he builds in some small 3-on-3 indoor soccer fields. There's like an arcade. There's a setup where you can play bags, or what some people call cornhole. And there's pickleball courts, food and beverage, all sorts of things. And so he's got a great tenant that's going to occupy most of the space, but he's got to finish the capital stack. And so that's where PACE and some city TIF money enter. And PACE is welcomed by the lender and the developer. It's still technically mid-construction, so we don't need to lean on any retroactive type designations. And I'm probably talking about this a little bit prematurely because it's set to close in the next week or two here. So I hope I don't jinx it, but it looks like PACE is going to be the solution to the problem. So that's kind of a long winding story about how PACE had interacted with a COVID issue to solve it.
That's really interesting. I will say I appreciate if you don't say that it hasn't been used in decades. It makes me feel old. I used that facility in college as a rec facility for intramural sports. I think it might have closed just a couple years ago, not decades ago.
Well, it was being used as storage for a long time. I know, but I think where that field house was operational. So
yeah, it's a very, very unique building. I was really excited to see after it closed shortly after I left college. I can't say it was in the best condition when I was there, but very interesting story. Fantastic. Ian or Ethan or Ian?
But just a couple points I think relevant to a lot of these projects is that, what we see when we go look at people that want to do retroactive PACE financing is that oftentimes they're concerned that, they didn't design quote unquote, green building or whatever, and they're concerned that their building may not qualify for PACE. And, in every situation that we've come in and had an energy engineer or an energy auditing firm look, they've been able to qualify, right? So it turns out that modern construction is actually quite energy efficient, right? So I think one concern people have that, their building is not green enough is typically unfounded. So that's my first just general comment. And then the second comment is, what we're also seeing, and not even on the retroactive side, but just for new projects is that, as banks have pulled back lending, especially in hospitality, but also in office and any kind of sort of mixed use project, we're seeing PACE able to fill that gap on a new construction capital stack because the capital is still available. And that way, even if the bank wants to do a lower LTC, PACE can step in and provide that gap capital and projects can still move forward.
Right. And I would just make a note right here in Missouri, retroactive or refinancing isn't specifically mentioned in the Missouri statute. And so there are some districts within Missouri that don't allow refinancing or retroactive. But in general, I think to your point there, Ian, is PACE doesn't have to be a LEED certified building, right? It just has to save that customer money. And a lot of times that's based off of what you're replacing or for new build, what the building code is, right?
Yeah, I mean, we find that, whether you're referencing, say, the 2015 code, I mean, the savings opportunities using, good quality construction are large, right? So we typically, that's the first question we get, and we kind of do the hand-holding process with the developer, and typically it's a non-issue, so.
Ethan, anything that you'd like to add regarding a project that was impacted by COVID?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say almost exactly what Ian said. So saying something new and different. What I would say, Josh, is that what's been interesting is that a lot of our clients are really thinking a lot more carefully about their energy consumption and ultimately, their NOI. And if let's just say 19 of 20 clients, pre-COVID, we're right to Ian's point, they were already building probably a more efficient building or an efficient building than code called for. But, they said, I'm going to do X and I'm good with that. And now, a meaningful percentage, maybe even about half of our customers who would have fallen in that bucket have said, I really do want to be more energy conscious. It's good for marketing. It's good for my, my ultimate NOI. So that's been something interesting. I think COVID really, exposed with costs going up, that people really need to be thoughtful about those things. So I think that's and we're very happy to see that trend. People are really starting to design even more efficient buildings than they once were.
Fantastic. So when we look at COVID or pandemic, post-pandemic specifically, right, the topics that I'm seeing, right, unfortunately it's not in Missouri, so you'll have to use your experience in other states, is, there's discussion related to like resiliency or health components. I think some states are looking at that particular policy that is directly COVID related. Does anybody have any experience looking at the health components with how PACE can be utilized?
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, we financed I'll just call it about a half retroactive project for HVAC improvements, but coupled that with new indoor air quality. So this was an office building who, had done some, I think it was a chiller replacement, say a year or two, pre-COVID, but then in order to get tenants comfortable back in the building, they were, expanding airflow, heavy duty, HEPA filters. So ultimately it came out to be maybe, not maybe a terribly large dollar amount project, as maybe $1 million, $1.5 million, something like that, but very impactful that you can pair, retroactive or just, again, kind of, HVAC renovation projects with indoor air quality as well, and bundle them and get 100% financing through PACE.
Great. Ian or Eric, any other thoughts on that topic about health?
Just to echo Ethan's point, yeah, we're seeing a lot of developers, one in particular that's going through a full-on redesign of the HVAC proposed for a new construction development to address some of those issues, indoor air quality specifically.
Great. Ian?
I mean, I'll just say that I think, generally speaking, trying to make PACE include measures that improve indoor air quality, or also, resiliency, whether that's, stormwater management or seismic out in California, or, hurricane type stuff, I think is going to be really important going forward in terms of making sure that, it works to create buildings that are not only energy efficient, but also, well designed for whatever is going to happen in the future.
Great. So a lot of your examples were retroactive. That's a particular policy that allows financing of a component or multiple components that was already installed, right? When you look at that, I guess the first question is, if that makes sense for COVID, for a couple of different reasons. And I'd like for you all, this is really hard for me because I usually can just go and talk on it. So having other experts here is fantastic, but I need to bite my tongue a little bit. I'd really like you to touch a little bit on the retroactivity, the basics of it, like how far back are we looking? And how does that play a role when a customer or contractor is thinking about, all right, I've already done the project 2 years ago. What does the refinancing or retroactive PACE process look like in their eyes? Ethan?
Sure. Well, and it is very, and I want to be focused on, mostly Missouri, but Josh, to your point, every state has said a little bit differently, can you go back a year? Can you go back 3 years? So, first and foremost, I think it's establishing, right, how far back, in Missouri, are we able to go? Maybe Josh, you can even speak on that right now.
So that's a great question. Missouri's statute is moot. So what we say in Missouri is we're limited 20 years for financing. And so all we say is, as long as that savings for the customer pans out, and that's usually no more than 4 years, because the savings calculations and the time on the useful life, all of that starts to run the moment it's installed for us. So if it was installed in 2018, that means it's been used for 3.5 years. So you'd lose those savings. But then if it had a 20-year useful life, you've got 17 years, 16.5 years left of whatever savings are calculated. That's kind of how we look at it.
Perfect. So I think we think about that, going backwards, and really again, right, when was the project done? How much did it cost? What were the savings on it? And then, I think for us, for two different perspectives, in the sense, what value is, wanted or needed from the the retroactive refinancing. In other words, what's kind of the use case for those proceeds? And there's a lot of good reasons why, but one of the key reasons why, people should be thoughtful about that is that ultimately, in the commercial PACE world, we have to have the lender provide an approval or consent. And in order to get that, we find that you really should have a good, use case for those proceeds, especially if it's, like a hotel or an office that, are more, kind of challenging commercial real estate projects right now. So I would think about it in those ways. Again, it's, when was it installed? What was the cost? And then again, what's your intentions to do, with the ultimate funding that PACE would provide?
Great. Ian, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, just following up from Ethan. I mean, we've had situations where the owner understands retroactive PACE and then, basically expects that they're going to do a cash out refi, right? And, retire equity or whatever. But then they have a conversation with their lender and it quickly changes to, okay, we're going to use this for, working capital. We're going to use this maybe to create a operating reserve for the project. So I think, yeah, owners need to be realistic about what is the use of proceeds and is it actually going to be helpful to their project? Because the lender, is typically, especially in a more challenged sector like hospitality or office or, a concert venue, the lender is not going to be thrilled with the owner just taking cash out of the project.
Absolutely. Eric?
Nothing substantive to add. I mean, I think you sort of alluded to it, but there are quite a few states that don't permit retroactive PACE, and it's hard for me to understand the reasoning behind that. It should be available widely. Seems like a perfectly good use and easily justifiable.
It is a really interesting topic. I know the Show Me PACE board, which MEI administers, had discussions on it and considered it a special type of project for a number of years until recently. We have several projects that have been impacted by COVID, and there's the refinancing really does provide that option for releasing some liquidity when they haven't had anybody walking in their doors for 18 months. Keeps them afloat for, hopefully when we had these discussions with them, we really thought that they'd be coming around now to operation. And it seems as if, at least in Missouri, we're seeing another impact. So hopefully these discussions can move forward. But Ian had mentioned hospitality, office, and concert venues is kind of the biggest hit from COVID that might have access to or best use for PACE and related to the pandemic. Is there another sector that you all are seeing outside of those three, office, hotel, hospitality, and concert, that would want to use PACE or is looking at PACE because of COVID?
I mean, I think, and Ian, again, really, I think hit the nail on the head on this earlier, is that for any new projects or upcoming, projects, new construction, redevelopment, renovation, that, the commercial lending environment right now for, I think, a lot of asset classes, maybe, LA and New York or maybe even just LA are a little bit of an outlier, Dallas or Florida. But, what we're seeing is that our clients are they're just not able to get the amount of lending that they once were pre-COVID. And that's true for, I think, almost every asset class. Multifamily, senior assisted living, that's another one where, retroactive financing especially is and particularly we see a lot of those projects come across our desk. But I think, we can provide value for, for any kind of, commercial project, because you're probably just not able to get the amount of financing you once were. And the project may no longer make sense without additional financing, coming from the PACE.
Great points. Eric, any thoughts?
No, I think Ian covered it. Sometimes we talk about retail as a potential asset class that may be suffering here shortly, but hasn't really materialized yet.
What I find interesting is one of the benefits for PACE that we've been using over the years is the ability for PACE to be that transferable unit, right? The pass-through unit. And each of these examples that we're talking about being hit by the pandemic, that pass-through part, retail, office, concerts, all that's hospitality, they're all the ones that are being impacted by COVID, and that pass-through, which provided that additional stability and even greater attractiveness of PACE, isn't there. So that's like that four-legged stool, and you cut one of those legs out. We just have to kind of, hopefully we can find a way to reposition those legs, make that a three-legged stool for a while and still able to hold everybody up. On to some more interesting stuff. What do you all see as the segment that is growing the most out there for commercial PACE?
I think if you look at the numbers, it's got to be hospitality, right? Over the last year, and probably within hospitality, you know, retroactive or rescue deals or whatever you want to call it. But that seems to really have exploded, you know, post-COVID.
Okay. Do you all see the ability for PACE not having to be paid right away, right? Where it's akin to the property tax, right? It's an ad valorem tax. It's paid at the same time. So that usually means at least, you know, a couple of months, if not a year. How does that conversation go for you all? And what should a contractor or property owner think about or know about the fact that PACE doesn't have to be paid right away like a traditional loan? And how does that, what type of conversation goes on there? We'll start with you, Eric.
Sure. You know, we think that's a really important point to make. I think all of us on this call, when we're originating projects, we're going to plan on, especially, you know, for that construction phase and often through a stabilization period. If we're talking about construction projects, we're going to capitalize interest so that there's no obligation during that period of time. Even on, you know, the retroactive projects, we're going to take the same approach as long as we can justify it through underwriting. But the absence of that obligation is critical and has been for, you know, a number of those projects that were coming online mid-COVID that needed both the capital infusion and the deferral of obligation for a period of time just to weather the storm. It was a really critical component. So not only, you know, the actual due date of the first payment being off in the future, but also the ability of PACE capital providers to be able to provide financing for that time period is really important.
Ethan?
I agree, and maybe just to again try and add something different. You know, typically, you know, you can defer a first payment by, you know, multiple years, again depending on underwriting and what everyone is, you know, is comfortable with. So that's been, I think, an attractive feature for, you know, just ensuring that, okay, I'm getting upfront capital that I can use, you know, right away for my project or for my liquidity, you know, or working capital needs. But I may not have to think about a first payment on that for, you know, 30 months or, you know, 20 months or something like that. So, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and you know, disappointingly so. I think we can all agree. So, you know, I think, you know, just continuing what, you know, again, I bet the three of us were thinking during COVID, this is a nice feature just to get you through, you know. Now it might be a little bit longer, but, you know, again, you've got, you know, multiple years before payment is going to be due, and knock on wood, you know, we'll all be, you know, past COVID by then.
Ian, any addition? All right. You know, so to summarize for folks that are, you know, still not understanding PACE, right? What we're here today, what we've heard today is that PACE number one has already helped properties who were impacted by COVID, the pandemic, where they didn't have the revenue. And those tools that outside of PACE's ability to be lower cost than other financing, it's the fact that you can refinance something several years old, looking at obviously underwriting, useful life, the savings. It can provide for health in some states, not necessarily in Missouri at this point, but definitely on the energy side, we look at the savings. And then here we're also seeing that the deferred payment allows you to hopefully look beyond where the pandemic is in 2021 and see that, you know, maybe your first payment is until 2022, giving you a full 18 months of hopefully operations to get back on your feet. So I think, would that be a good summary from you all? Do you think that those are the kind of high points for folks to think about PACE in relation to the pandemic?
Yeah, and one other thing I was going to add before my daughter walked through the door there was that, you know, on that Philly Met deal, what we worked on doing besides, you know, trying to defer payments with capitalized interest is we worked with the program administrator to set up a two-tier amortization schedule. So the payments, even when they started to the city, were interest only for the first 3 years, and then the amortization schedule kicked in. So, you know, every program administrator has different thoughts about whether they want to deal with that or not, but we're seeing increasingly people trying to do interest only periods during stabilization.
All right. There was a question, and that was, what are your thoughts on diversity, equity, and inclusion in your portfolios?
I mean, PACE Equity is a big believer in DEI, from the projects we do, you know, to the hires that we make. So I think one of the great tools about commercial PACE is that, you know, once it's authorized, say for a city or county, that any project in that city or county, you know, can you know, take advantage of PACE financing. So, and you know, we've done some great projects. I get to talk about just a little bit one of my favorite projects we ever did, which was ending a food desert. It was a new construction grocery store in St. Louis. So it's part of the North Side, you know, redevelopment plot. And, you know, talking about, you know, something like that, really, you know, bringing, you know, access to, you know, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and, you know, all sorts of groceries to, you know, food desert. That really, you know, to me, is about, you know, access and inclusion. So I'd say, you know, very pro, and again, lots of opportunities to take advantage for properties that need that kind of investment, you know, in any kind of, you know, city or county across Missouri.
Eric?
Yeah, Twain takes a similar approach. We have a DEI committee here at Twain that's been pretty active. And apart from our corporate level DEI work, there's probably tangentially related, but in our PACE portfolio specifically, we've separated out facilities so that, you know, we can do some internal tracking. So if we are lending on projects that are located within new markets eligible census tracts or qualified census tracts for LIHTC, you know, census tracts that have been designated as low income or, you know, high poverty census tracts, so that we can measure the kind of job creating activities that we've done in there, the amount of investment that we've done there. And so, you know, it's something that's on our radar. It's important to us. And, you know, even in kind of the earlier years of our PACE financing, we were proud to see, you know, hundreds of construction and permanent jobs created by our PACE financing annually.
Great. Ian?
And I'll just echo what Ethan and Eric said, and also I'll point out that a lot of PACE programs now have specific DEI targets if you want to use PACE, where you have to use minority and women-owned businesses and contractors, and you have to have a community inclusion plan and some job creation metrics. So I think, combining PACE in a more holistic, like community development focus is kind of where the industry is going, and I think it's great.
I wanted to share with everyone here that what you see on the screen, Show Me PACE with Jimmy I administers, some interesting numbers that we've been able to produce with our partners, the folks that hear on the call is, we funded 10 projects that were where the contractors were women and minority owned businesses, which is 22 million in PACE financing, total economic impact of over $121 million, $25 million savings for these property owners, and over 2,900 jobs created. So it is, as our prior panelists said, if you can track it, that's where the proof is. Obviously, we want to continue to do better, and we can only do that when our partners, as they've echoed here today, share that belief. And so we are all working together in that. But I wanted to show you something we had put together here to demonstrate our commitment and our success. So sorry about that. Let's see. All right. So there was one other question. Oh, that was just the answer. All right. Well, any last comments before we close up? Ethan?
Well, again, thanks, Josh and Travis and MEI for and the sponsors for putting this on and having us speak. Hopefully this has been helpful. And I think if there's one thing to take away, that, commercial PACE can be used for all kind of shapes and sizes of commercial projects, renovation, redevelopment, ground up new construction across all different commercial asset classes. So, whether it's a large project, small project, complex, simple, a lot of different applications, and hopefully we'll be talking soon.
Absolutely. Eric?
Yeah, thanks again, MEI and Josh. This has been a fun exercise and a good exercise, and to just think about high-level energy policy and how PACE interacts with it. And I hope that everyone who's on today, and of course the panelists, can continue to think through how PACE can impact and be impacted by energy policies and how it's going to interact with them in the future. I think a lot of times we kind of get hamstrung by statutory language and what we can and can't do. But over the last 24 hours as we've been talking, I think there are just so many different ways that we can meet the challenges of the world today, whether it's energy use, climate challenges, or just building a more sustainable world, and what new and emerging definitions of sustainability even mean. We're kind of on the frontier here, and so it's been great to hear everyone's perspectives and think about how we can contribute.
Thank you so much, Eric. Ian?
Yeah, I think we're really, optimistic about the future of PACE going forward here. I think it seems like the dam is finally broken in both, geographically and by project type. And I think, what you've seen on the COVID response to, all these retroactive financings, like I feel that, the future is very bright for PACE. And so, we're excited to be a part of it. And thanks everybody on the panel, and thanks Josh, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you all so much. Very exciting. Obviously, should go without saying that all three are available for questions and answers. Look at their contact info website. MEI is also available if you got any questions on PACE. Really excited for our next session, a new, interesting way of